That's Jimmy Stein. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Jimmy, wasn't an easy win by any means. In fact, I would say a huge portion of Alabama fans, at least at one point in that 29-22 victory over South Carolina, they probably thought that it was a real possibility that the Crimson Tide could suffer their second loss. And when you're talking about a 3-4 football team, that's going to be frustrating for anybody when you just watch them beat four straight top 20 opponents. At the same time, though, I think playing four top 20 opponents consecutively is a big reason why we saw a 29-22 victory and why it was ugly at various points in that football game. But at the same time, what were your initial thoughts, not only just going through the game, watching it live, and then also, I think all of us, as you remove emotion from the situation and you actually start evaluating what took place, in a lot of ways, the more I thought about it, the more I was actually impressed with what Alabama did on Saturday.
Yeah, a couple things, about playing that tough schedule. It's not, I know a lot of people point to how do you beat these ranked teams and then struggle with an unranked team? There's a cumulative effect to playing a tough schedule. It adds up. The bumps, the bruises, the stress of always having to perform at an A+ level just to win games. It all adds up. It's also human tendency to relax a little bit when you're tested to your limits 4 times in a row, and now you're playing someone that's perceived not to be a test. It's just human tendency. It's just human normal reaction to relax a little bit. But about South Carolina being 3-4, look, I heard an NFL scout say this last year. He was referring to the Oklahoma loss in Norman, and he talked about how Oklahoma was perceived as, hey, that's a 500 football team. How's Alabama lose to them? 500 football teams in the SEC are different beasts than 500 football teams everywhere else. That's a tough environment to play in. Willie Bryce has a national reputation of just being a really difficult place to play. And I know South Carolina doesn't have a great record, but they have dudes. Everyone listening to this show watched the game. They have dudes. Maybe they don't have as many dudes as Georgia or Tennessee, but Lenore Sellers is a premium athlete. I mean, a premium athlete. He could potentially be a first-round pick. Nick Harbor, he's an SEC freak, even by SEC standards. Dylan Stewart, their best pass rusher, he might be the #1 pick in the 2027 NFL draft. Brian Thomas, the other pass rusher, he's going to play pro football. Kilgore, DQ Smith, some of these young offensive linemen they got that are getting the crap kicked out of them right now, they're going to be all conference players and NFL players in 2 or 3 years. So South Carolina has dudes. Don't just think of them as, oh, well, they're 3-4. No, they're 3-4 in the SEC with an SEC home stadium and several NFL football players. It was never going to be easy. I think Alabama did a great job. They could have just accepted the loss and said, well, it was bound to happen. But nope, they drove out of the ditch they had driven into, got back on the road, ended the game on a high note, and I now like the momentum and the optimism going into next week.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Just the way that this game played out, it was rough. I mean, it had rough moments, but I said this 50 times in the postgame show. They found a way to win. That is ultimately what matters. We can talk about how it looked, but sometimes, I mean, I was, an Ohio State fan was talking about how essentially I said, in some ways, this is more of a championship caliber performance from Alabama than if they would have won 40-0, because they figured out a way to win this style of football game, which they have done. They have been in dogfights pretty much each and every week, it feels like, and they figured out ways to win those. But this is one of those where it's like, there's also an element that's not there. Like against Tennessee, you're expected to be in a dogfight. Against Missouri, a top 20 opponent, you're expected. We all know what Diego Pavia and Vanderbilt did to Alabama last year. We know Pavia is a really good football player. You expect to be in a dogfight. You go to Athens to play Georgia, you expect it. But when you're going against a 3-4 football team and you find yourself in a dogfight, there's this element of, are we really screwing this up? Especially when you're Alabama. And there can be this element of, are we screwing this up again? We have done this a lot last year. We did it against Florida State this year. Now we're doing it again. That can become a mental, it's like Georgia's problem with Alabama. It becomes a mental hurdle that other teams don't deal with. So, the fact that they were able to say, no, we're not going to accept that we're going to do this again. We're going to go out there and we're going to figure out a way to get this done, get this victory. And when they went down 8 points, not only do you have to score a touchdown, but you got to get a 2-point conversion. Those are tough to get. They're not easy. I thought the play design was great, but they're not as easy as you would think, considering the distance away from, converting you are. But at the same time, this team went out there. They did that. They got the 2-point. They, go back out there on defense. They get their offense the football back, and then they end up scoring another touchdown. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that as well. But just overall, you have to be impressed with this team's resiliency and the fact that in a different type of game, given the opponent, they still figured out a way to overcome any mental obstacles that stood in the way to get a victory. I think that's very important. I mentioned that it was more impressive. An Ohio State fan was like, oh, imagine if Indiana would have struggled with UCLA. Like, you're trying to justify a poor performance against a poor football team. My argument to that was last year Ohio State lost to Michigan. They were in a dogfight against Nebraska. Both of those are 7-5, 6-6 football teams. They had to figure out a way to win one of those, which was Nebraska. They lost against Michigan. You can make the argument rivalry. Understand that. That's why I used the Nebraska game as another example. You look at Notre Dame against Northern Illinois, the fact that they lost against a 7-5 MAC opponent, and then they end up going to the national championship. Oregon, who was the number 1 overall seed going into the college football playoff, they ended up in a dogfight late fourth quarter tie ball game against Wisconsin, who Alabama destroyed earlier in the season. So this is something that every championship caliber team just about is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about parity, from us and everyone else, that there's a parity in college football these days that has never existed. And people point rightfully to the transfer portal, where the Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State second team players are now everyone else's first team players. That's true. And that extrapolates on out. And all these superstar FCS players, there's always been superstar FCS players. They are now FBS players after 1 year. They get battlefield promotions. Everybody moves. So that's created this. But hey, shout out to Josh and them over there at College Football Nerds. They brought up an excellent point this week, and that I couldn't agree with more. Another thing helping this parity are the clock rules, the new clock rules. They've only been around 2 or 3 years now, but the new clock rules, I think undermanned teams, especially Vanderbilt, doing an excellent job using the new clock rules to shorten games. Okay. And when you're like, well, how does that give you an advantage? Pretty easy. I mean, I can just give you an example. I hate using my own crappy tennis game as the analogy, but I wasn't great. I wasn't a great player. I was good, but I wasn't great. But if you put me on a court against a great player and the whole match is going to be decided in 12 points, I got a great chance. I might find a way to win 7 points out of the 12 even early. But if we have to play 100 points, I'm going to lose every time. He's eventually going to win too many points if you give him 100 chances. He's a lot better than I am. Football's the same way. The shorter game gives the underdog a better chance. Fewer plays on offense, fewer plays on defense. They might win the plays at the right moments. If both teams are playing 100 snaps, the underdog has very little chance. So I think it's NIL, it's the portal, it's the clock rules. That's why we're having closer games. There's been some comment on these top 25 and SEC games are having a closer margin of victory this year than the NFL. Why? Clock rule, I think, has a lot to do with these close games. So I think add it all up, and Alabama fans just should no longer in this new landscape feel slighted or worried that you're playing close games against, quote, 500 football teams. Everybody's good. Everybody's got dudes. That's not going to end. These next 2 opponents, especially for Alabama, LSU and Oklahoma lost on Saturday. Clint will be talking about in our previews leading up to those games. This is what LSU and Oklahoma don't lack. Dudes, both sides of the ball. They'll be very tough to deal with regardless of what their perceived program momentum is.
Brian Kelly didn't get fired because of a lack of talent. I promise you. It's that he couldn't get the most out of that talent. And that's what a lot of these coaches and teams are dealing with at this point. But and it's like during the game, I mean, there's frustration because, and I made this comparison or this statement on Saturday following the game. It becomes a chicken or the egg. Was it that Alabama struggled in this game against a another inferior opponent, and that is just par for the course as far as what Alabama fans should expect from Kalen DeBoer? Or is it the fact that they played four really good football teams and that created a situation that looks like it's just struggling against another inferior opponent, but really it's just the fact that you were coming off of an absolute gauntlet and you were wore down at, at the right places. And from a game plan preparation standpoint, when you're constantly having to put together A+ game plans each and every week, and you're kind of emptying the clip a little bit, you've got some things stored away, but you're having to pull out a 2-point conversion, a key one that you had, kind of banked and ready to go. You pull that out. It's like, I'm not saying they don't have more put away. I guarantee you they do. But what I'm saying is you start emptying the clip a little bit, and you got to figure out creative ways where you had this stored away for a key moment, and you have to go ahead and use it. The third down play call against Georgia right there at the end of the game when they needed it, the throw back to Jam Miller. I mean, that's one of those where great play design, great play call, but that's now been put on tape. So, how many times can you use that? Not saying they won't try to use it again, but I'm saying that it's once again, in some ways, emptying the clip. It's tough. It really is, because South Carolina, with the environment, with the pass rush, with what I think is a pretty good second level of defenders, with a Superman caliber quarterback, especially on the ground, especially when you're trying to tackle him, this combination of factors can really cause any body problems. And once again, this was a South Carolina team that a lot of these others that beat them didn't have to deal with. And that was a South Carolina team that their back is against the wall. Now we're talking about Shane Beamer potentially being fired. Now we're talking about, four losses at this point going into this game. It's like college football playoff ain't happening. They were still technically in the discussion with 3 losses, and they were 3, once again, really good losses. So once they hit 4, it was over. So it's like, okay, we got nothing to lose. Let's cut it loose. Let's, try to right this ship as much as we can. It's just, it's not making excuses. It's just there's several justifiable reasons why you saw some of the things that you saw. Now, granted, I think it's time to start getting into actually what we saw. And we'll start, I guess, do you want to start with the defense or the offense?
Let's start with the offense.
Yeah, let's start with the offense, because that's the rough side of the football. There were some good moments, but there were some not so great moments. So I like that. What were your thoughts on how the offense performed relative to whether it be expectations or whether it be compared to previous performances?
I think the primary problems, and this was a pretty bad game by the Alabama offense. Maybe it's worst. I would say definitely it's worst since Florida State. This was the second worst offense performance of the year, other than the opening debacle. And why was it a struggle? I mean, for me, it was two big things. Failure to protect Ty well enough. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't disastrous, but they didn't protect Ty well enough. And secondly, the run game, which has been an issue all year long, I think to some extent kind of bottomed out. I mean, like that was really poor performance from the run game. And why is that? We'll both tackle that. But up front, it's just not good enough with the pass protection. Now, give South Carolina some credit there. They have 2, not just NFL players, but 2 high-value NFL pass rushers. I mean, that makes them no different than playing Georgia, than playing LSU, than playing Ohio State. No different as it relates to getting those ends blocked. Everywhere else, they're a little more average, but that's tough there. So it is a tough draw period. But we didn't protect Ty well enough. Too many pressures. I know PFF says Will Conforme gave up 4 pressures. I think it might have been. It felt like more. And it felt like more than 1 pressure from Caden Proctor on the other side. I don't think either tackle played well. Cole Kubelik noted in his notes on Sunday that neither tackle played well. The pass protection just wasn't good enough. But the bigger problem to me is just the run game continues to not be helping. Now they've changed personnel a little bit. Notable that for the first time, Daniel Hill played just as many snaps as Jam Miller. They had a 50-50 snap share. Kevin Riley only played a couple of snaps. It was really Jam Miller and Daniel Hill splitting time equally. It helped late. It helped in the pass game in the sense that Daniel Hill, I think, was the leading receiver in the game in terms of receiving yards, which is a real stunner. I'm not sure how many people would have bet that before the game started. But Daniel, so in that sense, it was good. Daniel Hill struggled in pass protection, by the way. He gave up one sack was on him. Once, for as much as we look at the offensive line as a failure in pass protection, that was a Daniel Hill failure that gave up one of the South Carolina's 2 sacks. But the run game, Clint, it remains a problem. My number one explanation, I know a lot of people just think, well, Jam and Hill and Richard Young and Kevin Riley, they just aren't that great. I would agree with that to an extent, but I refuse to believe it's true in all 4 instances based on what kind of prospects they are, based on what kind of physical package they bring to the table. I really think the number one issue is schematic. And by that, as one example, I'll give Alabama spends, Clint may even have the numbers in front of him as good as Clint is at this stuff. Alabama spends an enormous amount of time right now in 11 personnel. That's their look. That's what they do almost all the time. 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers. The second tight end just isn't even getting a lot of snaps. And sometimes when the second tight end's getting snaps, he's the only tight end out there. So sometimes it's 11 personnel, even when Caleb Edwards is out there. But point being, it's 11 personnel most of the time. And that doesn't do the running back a whole lot of favors. I mean, a lot of teams do have success running from 11 personnel, but it's tough. And this is how it's tough. I'll explain best I can as to why it's tough. In the old days in college football, to help your running back out, we used to put a fullback in front of him. There was a fullback right in front of the running back who cleared the path for him. That's what we used to do to help the running back out. Well, we don't play with fullback anymore. Almost no one does in college football. It's rare that you see a fullback in college football these days. That has been replaced primarily by a second tight end who performs many of the functions that an old-time fullback would have. But that's 12 personnel. When you have 2 tight ends out there, that second tight end is often being a huge aid to the running back in the run game. But when you don't have that guy out there and you've just replaced him with a third wide receiver who weighs 190 pounds and lines up outside, you're not really helping the running back and certainly not helping the running back in the box. So when I say some of the problems are schematic, that's one of the things I'm talking about, is that the running back's having to do a lot on his own because of all the 11 personnel. And when you say, oh, well, that's easy to solve, just go back to using 12 personnel. You taking Ryan off the field? You taking Germie off the field? Are we taking Horton or Rico? Or our wide receivers are the best, deepest unit on the team. It makes all the sense in the world to keep 3 receivers out there because they're the best players on the team. But anyway, that's just one explanation I have for why the running game is just not working.
I would agree with that, at least to an extent. I do think that there's like Tennessee's approach to running the football is to spread you out, and you've got some dudes and you create those isolated matchups. When you go 12, defense is obviously going to match that personnel, and it's going to, when you do condensed formations, you bring more guys into the box. I think Alabama's biggest problem is last year they had blocking dudes at tight end. So if you bring in that 12 personnel, how much are you really adding from a blocking standpoint? If they had, Caleb Edwards is going to be a really good blocker in due time. Cuevas has improved in that area. But I would say as far as people moving and getting guys blocked one-on-one when they're asked to, especially out there on the edges, I just don't think they're doing it consistently enough where Alabama really doesn't have a choice. So I agree to an extent. You can run the football and run the football extremely well, not doing the more run-heavy personnel. But I think right now the continuity factor with the offensive line, the different body types, they do different things well. It's like a Cam Dewberry, maybe a Jaden Roberts. These guys are more – it's like, okay, those are more of the 12 personnel styles of guard, where it's run heavy, it's condensed. It's, hey, let's put a bunch of bodies because we're going to move some bodies. But then you've got Parker Brailsford playing in between them, who's more of an athlete. It's a little bit different. I saw Parker Brailsford get stalemated by an off-ball linebacker. I want to say it was Sean Murphy. Could be wrong. Could have been Justin Okoronkwo, but completely stalemated trying to work up to the second level on one run. And then, Jam Miller had nowhere to go. So as good as Parker Brailsford is, that lack of size and strength and power, relative to, your big maulers, it is going to be a little bit of a problem. So, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but I also think there are ways to work around that. And I think Alabama has the ability to figure out a way to work around it, but they've got to address the run game, because I thought it was trending in the right direction. I was seeing the flashes. I thought South Carolina was more gettable on the ground. And the fact that they could not do anything, and it became, hey, Ty Simpson, go be Superman again. But this week, do it without Latsir Brooks, and do it with a limited Isaiah Horton, and do it with a lot of your receivers dropping footballs, and you having a slightly off day playing in a very hostile environment. It's like, that's a big ask of your quarterback, which is why I say, despite the fact that Ty Simpson was slightly off, I don't think he played terrible by any means. I think overall he played pretty well, and he got better in the critical moments when they needed him. But I would say this was definitely an off performance relative to some of the previous performances. And it was kind of understandable, because, I mean, there was a lot going against him in this football game. When you talk about all that stuff, plus the pass rush, plus the fact that Daniel Hill has been pretty good in pass protection, and then randomly, out of 3 of his pass blocking snaps, he gives up 2 pressures and a sack. That's a very high rate of allowing pressure. So, I mean, I think Simpson had a lot that he had to overcome, and that is not having a complementary run game is a massive, massive problem for Alabama.
Yeah, Ty wasn't great, but when you factor in that we're shorthanded at wide receiver, the most shorthanded I think this team has been all season long, in terms of Lottie out, Isaiah Horton gets hurt in the first half. I'm not sure Ryan Williams has been 100% healthy the entire season, frankly, with between the concussion and a hamstring issue. Those hamstring issues are sort of hard to get past. It's just that was the most limited we've been at wide receiver. Then throw in the protection isn't great, in part because you're playing 2 freak NFL defensive ends. Protection's not great. Wide receiver group is limited. Though Daniel Hill's not as good at the pass protection as Jam Miller has, from a lack of experience that Jam has, and we're having to play Daniel Hill more for obvious reasons. I think you add all that up, and it explains why Ty had his worst game since Florida State. That was his second least effective game behind just Florida State. I think it's for all those reasons. I don't think it's necessarily on Ty, but Ty did miss a few times. I do think that deep ball is a bit of an issue. I'm not saying it's a huge issue and it's going to hurt him in the draft, although it may, but there was a concerted effort to hit a deep ball in this game. I think they thought they could get South Carolina, and frankly, the routes and everything that they did downfield, that sort of proved true. We just missed it. We didn't connect, and I think it's an issue. I think going forward, I think you're still going to see Alabama almost forcing that to happen, because they realize if they do add a deep ball threat to what they've already got, now they're just harder to defend in all these other areas, including the run game. And I think they want to hit these deep balls so badly. They clearly have the wide receivers for it, between Brooks and Ryan and Germ and the others. They got the crew to get it done. But between the protection and Ty just missing barely, but he does miss, still can't hit on those deep balls. And I think that's a factor as well. But it all gets back to this. Alabama can't run the ball. I think they had a difficult time maintaining leads in the second half, because when they run the ball, it's just not effective. You just end up punting, and we're not running the ball to milk the clock. What's milking the clock is using some of the pass game as an extension of the run game to keep the clock moving. Short gains in the passing game have kept the clock moving in time of possession, but it's not chewing up first downs with the running backs. They just haven't done that, and it's fair to question whether they can get it done at all.
Yeah, I mean, and when you talk about the offense and how, like, where your threats, we've talked about how much strain this offense can put on you. But when you're not running the football effectively, you don't have a vertical passing game, and that is becoming increasingly evident. Then what are you left with? You're left with like the short to intermediate passing game, and that's pretty much the only thing that you have available. So I think in some ways, based off of how South Carolina was playing the offense, they're like, okay, we're going to try to make you pay for some of this, because you're putting a lot of emphasis on – I do think there was some emphasis on stopping the run, but also I think there was some emphasis on obviously what has been the biggest strength for Alabama, which has been the short to intermediate passing game. So they're like, we're going to go vertical on you and try to get you out of some of those things where we can really start to open things up for our run game, or we can open up things for what we want to do or what we do the best probably, which is the short to intermediate stuff. And just they couldn't make South Carolina pay for it. So that's why they kept presenting those opportunities to Alabama, and they kept taking them. I also think there was an element of we have explosive playability. We've got to get that on track. And they almost force it at times. I think it was a combination of those two things where some of it felt forced, some of it felt that's just what South Carolina's given them. I understand it. It makes sense. You couldn't connect. That is a problem. But Alabama, I mean, if teams are not worried about your vertical passing game and they're not worried about your run game, it's going to get increasingly more difficult for what you have done extremely well up to this point. So that's why they have to. To me, it starts with the run game. I think if you have a run game and you have that short intermediate passing game, the fact that you have receivers who, if you can just get that timing right, a little bit better as far as the deep stuff, and even if it's not a staple, which, under Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, they love the vertical passing game. So they would love for it to be a staple, but even if it's not, even if it's a change of, a change up, then I think that would really make the offense that much more dynamic, but you're just not seeing it. And it's creating some difficult situations. I thought from a, play action, there was one in particular, obviously on the fumble from Ty Simpson, and that was 100% on Daniel Hill. I think Caden Proctor didn't play a great game either. But on that sack, that strip sack, it was 100% on Daniel Hill. It was not on Caden Proctor. You're not asking Proctor to get that blitzing corner from space. Not with that speed, not with what he does. And Daniel Hill had a perfect opportunity. He just missed, and that ended up happening. On a later play, same play action look, Jam Miller's in there, and you got a blitzing corner. It was a different corner that was blitzing, same from the same position, but just a different number. And Jam Miller was able to run him by Ty, just enough. It wasn't like this phenomenal block, but it was just, hey, we're going to take your momentum. We're going to run you by Ty. Ty was able to kind of just barely step up, and then he's got all day because that's what they're expecting to get home. To me, I thought that was a pretty good example of a difference between Jam Miller and Daniel Hill and just where they're at from a pass protection standpoint, even though Daniel Hill overall is doing some good things. I think he's really good as far as the tackle to tackle. You got a blitz in linebacker, and he's got to step up and stick his nose in there. I think he's pretty good with that. When you ask him to read or scan the entire field, and he knows he's got backside, he's got blind side, and it's a corner blitzing from space or depth, I think he struggles with that a little bit. He struggles seeing it. He sees it a little bit late. And so that is something that I think South Carolina saw on tape. They try to take advantage. And in one instance, it paid off in a major way. In another instance, it didn't. But there's problems with this offense. Now, we'll talk about – so Proctor played 100% of the snaps, but obviously one of them was at running back. So Olasalinen played one snap. Now, granted, what they did was they did an overload where technically it was Wilkin Formby at left tackle, and then Alinen was like the tight end to the outside of him, and then you had Cuevas lining up as quote-unquote the right tackle on the other side. But Alinen did play one snap. Dewberry played 72.5% of the snaps at left guard, with Will Sanders playing 27.5%. It's pretty much a 3-1 split. Brailsford and Roberts both played 100% of the snaps. Thought that was interesting for Roberts, but at the same time, not surprising. Sanders has been playing left guard, and Gino Vandermark was out of the game. He was questionable going in. I think he ended up becoming probable, but then he didn't play, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that.
Correct.
But the biggest surprise to me, Jimmy, was Formby played 85.5% of the snaps at right tackle. Michael Carroll played 14.5%. After the way things have been trending, now granted, with the way Formby played against Tennessee, he probably earned a bigger share of the opportunities, even though he struggled in this game. Michael Carroll also didn't have a great game with this 14.5%, snap share, but that was probably the biggest development or surprise to me relative to the entire offensive line and the way that it actually looked on Saturday.
Yeah, it feels like the trend reversed. The trend had been Carroll increasing, starts against Tennessee, but has failures. And when we talked about before on the show, and I think it's helpful to cover it again, when your tackle gets beat, when it's one-on-one, and you see your tackle get beat, we don't all have to be offensive line coaches to see what happened. You got physically beat, you got out-quicked, bull rushed, he beat you with an inside spin move, whatever it is. But when we see a player get beat physically, we throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, he's just not good enough. What we don't see, because we're not all offensive line coaches, we're not all that. What we don't see are missed assignments, because we don't know the blocking scheme. We don't know what each individual offensive lineman's responsibilities and assignments are. It's almost impossible for us to know that unless we have extensive offensive line backgrounds as to what each player is supposed to own each play. And that's where having a true freshman is problematic. They don't know that stuff any better than a lot of us do. They're just learning it. That in high school football, let's say you got this guy, you got this guy. It's not as complicated as it becomes in this chess game that they play in college, moving pieces around and adjustments post snap and all these shifts that have to happen. And an easy guess is Michael Carroll hasn't been great at that stuff, nor should he be, nor should we expect him to be. But my guess is that's why Formby has sort of, at this moment, kind of retaken right tackle. Formby knows the spot, and he knows who he's supposed to get. Does he get beat sometimes? Yes. But the coaches grade it all, and a missed assignment is every bit as bad as getting beat, because we know what the end result is. Pressure on Ty or no room in the run game. And it's just apparent to me, Clint, that they've just looked at snap by snap what's happening at right tackle, and Formby on a snap-to-snap basis has been more effective than Michael Carroll, even though there are occasional snaps where he gets beat. But I think Michael Carroll's just learning. And frankly, if we had to project right now for those that say, gosh, Carroll's going backwards, I don't think so. I would tell you right now that he's going to be the full-time starter at right tackle or right guard next season. I really believe that. And I think he'll be performing at an all-SEC type level next year. But this is the learning year, and he's still learning. And I think that's why Formby has sort of retaken over the snap share title at right tackle, because Michael Carroll just still has a lot to learn.
Yeah, that is a great point. I think right now what you're seeing is physical limitations limit Formby. You're seeing mental limitations limit Michael Carroll. Now, you can also make the argument, if Wilkin Formby doesn't have proper technique, is that mental or physical? Well, I think it's something that you're doing physically that is limiting you, even though it's mental. Like, hey, you're not taking the right steps. You're not. So it's kind of both. But I think Michael Carroll's is more of a pure missed assignment, not understanding what he needs to be doing. But from a physical standpoint, I think probably you would get more of the job being done than Wilkin Formby. I don't think he has the physical limitations that Formby does, but they're trying to balance this where it's like, man, you've got to come on as far as, not having those missed assignments, because those missed assignments can be massive problems. We want to trust you, but there's also an earning aspect of this as well, where if he's not taking the steps to make improvement each and every week as far as the mental lapses, then you don't want to reward that, because Wilkin Formby is struggling by saying, despite the fact that you're not doing what you need to do to get this stuff fixed, we got to have you, so we're going to put you out there more. So it's like, you go out there and you prove it to us and we'll play you more. I think it was trending in that direction, but I think against Tennessee, he had some pretty key missed assignments, a couple of them early. I think Wilkin Formby had a really solid game. And so based off of that, one thing Ryan Grubb has said, it is not skill position based right now. It is offense based. This is a production built offense. If you go out there and you produce, you'll get more opportunities. That's the bottom line. So if Carroll wants more opportunities, if he doesn't like 14 and whatever it was, 14.5%, go out there and earn a larger snap share. Do what you need to do from a mental standpoint. Get yourself ready. That is just him being a true freshman. That is going to come, and he is ultra competitive. And I have no doubt that he is going to work his tail off to get that figured out as much as anything physically on the field. But that's a problem for Alabama. I would say Alabama's edges, their tackles got their asses kicked in pass protection, and I would say the interior got their asses kicked in run blocking. I think as far as Caden Proctor, he actually looked pretty decent as a run blocker. I thought he was the best run blocking offensive lineman Alabama had on Saturday. Thought Wilkin Formby wasn't great, so it wasn't like the tackles were great as run blockers, but he was okay. The two guards in pass protection were actually pretty good, but they, in my opinion, I don't think either one of them could create any sort of consistent movement. As far as those isolated blocks on the interior defensive line, I mean, you saw them, stand them up, shed them, make tackles. You saw that on multiple occasions. That is something that's like and the Bobby's coming at a great time, but they've got to get that fixed, Jimmy.
I'm sure somebody out there listening, maybe more than a few of you have said to yourselves or your pals while you're watching games or, in your breakdown, a lot of you may have said that you don't think Geno Vandermark's a good player and you don't understand why Jaden Roberts not playing full time because Jaden seems to be over the concussion issue, seems to be healthy. Why doesn't Jaden Roberts play the full game? Why are we playing Geno Vandermark? For those who have said that, I'm talking to you right now, just pointing this out. Okay, there's your Jaden Roberts game. 100% of the snaps at right guard for Jaden Roberts. He had the full game, no Geno Vandermark. What was the end result? Second worst offensive performance of the whole year. Am I blaming that on Jaden Roberts? Of course not. Of course not. He can only do 1/11th of the job that's required. That's his job, just 1/11th. Not blaming on Jaden Roberts. What I'm just saying is pointing out that usually the coaches are playing the right guys. Usually the rotation. They know a lot more what goes on in the practice field. They know a lot more about what's going on the grading sheet. There was a reason Geno's been playing all these snaps and all this time, and Jaden hadn't been. You finally get your 100% Jaden Roberts game. They can't run the ball, which is his sort of specialty, but they can't run the ball. And I just think we saw justification for why we see so much of Geno Vandermark. And I'm sure he'll be back next week. And I bet he plays. I'm just going to guess. I would guess he's going to play half the game at right guard against LSU, and Jaden will play the other half. As Jaden gets more experience this year and playing his way into game shape from all the time he's missed with the injuries, I think Jaden's going to get better and better as the season progresses. But I just wanted to point out, because I know there's been some Vandermark critics out there that think we'd been much better off with Jaden. We get Jaden and we see the end result actually wasn't any better. In fact, to some extent, judging it just by production, it was worse.
Yeah, and a couple of things. I thought it was encouraging that Jaden Roberts, after having to leave the Tennessee game with an ankle injury, I think it was an ankle injury, he was able to play 100% of the snaps. And was he great? No, I don't think anybody on the offensive line was great by any means. Nowhere close. But I thought, that was encouraging from a playing standpoint and playing his way back into shape. When you have to play all 69 snaps, that's certainly going to get you there. The last thing we'll touch on very quickly is the wide receivers, because Lottie Brooks was out. I kind of wondered, you knew it was going to be some combination of Germie Bernard playing in the slot, Ryan Williams playing in the slot, Rico Scott, who actually ended up getting the start, him playing in the slot some, and then Isaiah Horton actually did see a 20%, of his 10 snaps, 3 out of 10. I think it was 3 out of 10, which would actually be 30%. No, it was, yeah. So it was 20% of his snaps did come in the slot, which was higher than his about 10% average throughout the course of the season. But he also had to leave the game. He went to the locker room. He was banged up, so it was a very small sample size. Saw a little bit of Derek Meadows, 3 snaps. You did see Cole Adams in the second half with a couple of snaps. Obviously played both of those in the slot. He is a slot-only option, in my opinion. But Bernard, and it was Bernard, Williams, and Rico, Rico played 26.5% of his snaps in the slot. Ryan Williams played 56.5% of his, and Germie Bernard was at 40.6%. So, it was a kind of a share there. And granted, you had seen that all throughout the season, even with Lottie available. But Lottie's the one, like when he's out there, he's going to be in the slot 9 times out of 10. So I thought that was interesting. Ryan Williams had the drop. Also, Rico Scott had a drop. Also, Germie Bernard had his first drop of the season. You saw drops everywhere. It was not just Ryan. It's just Ryan's is going to be magnified because it's been a consistent problem for him throughout the season. But, one thing I will say from a trust standpoint, in those big moments when they seem to want to go to Germie Bernard a lot in those very critical moments. And he is always making plays. The trust factor is 100% there. And, I will say too, You talk about how the game started. It started off with a Germie Bernard run. It finished with a Germie Bernard run, as far as the touchdown. So they sandwiched. I thought that was interesting from a wide receiver, but it just shows the versatility that he brings to the table.
Germie Bernard played every snap. I mean, Ty didn't have his best game. It was Ty's second worst game all year. Like, why? Well, I would agree with anybody that Ty looked a little off at times. I mean, he was a little less accurate than normal. Why is that? Well, the wide receiver core was completely different. I mean, Lottie Brooks is out. Isaiah Horton gets hurt in game, and then he can't play. Ryan has sort of been playing banged up, period, with a little hammy issue. So the wide receiver core was different. It was different. The makeup of it was different to the point that Germie had to play every single snap on offense. That's asking a lot of a wide receiver who does a lot of running out there. That's soccer player stuff in terms of how much Germie's running up and down the field for 60 minutes. So that's different. The protection's not as good. We talked about the offensive line struggled. You can't run the ball. You add all that up, and it's kind of remarkable Todd did what he was able to do. You don't have your normal receiver core. That's patchwork. Offensive line's not protecting well. You're not running the ball. Sort of all on Ty. And I thought overall he held up really well. But Germie Bernard, so much the heart and soul of this team to me. Germie has moved Clint to a level of he's not just a good player. He's not just a great player. Germie is the reason Alabama wins football games. Why is Alabama number 4? Why is Alabama a contender to win the SEC? Why is Alabama a contender to make the playoffs and advance? Why? Germie Bernard. Right. Germie Bernard is a huge reason that this can be a highly successful team. It does take a team, but to make a team needs superstars. Germie Bernard is a superstar on this team in terms of all he's asked to do at receiver, at running back, running the ball, catching the ball, being a physical presence, being a leader, being a, oh my gosh, the whole season depends on one play. Who are we going to? Germie Bernard is who we're going to. And I just appreciate what we've seen from Germ and his career. He's had the funnest career arc to me, Clint. It started at Michigan State, and his quarterback was Peyton Thorne. How weird does that feel?
Yeah.
Started at Michigan State, then moves to Washington, where he's behind the best receiver core in Washington Huskies history, Rome Odunze and those guys. He's behind all those guys, but still does enough to win the coach's confidence to the point when they moved up. To be honest, I'm being a little biased here, but yeah, when they moved up to Alabama, Germie is one they drug with them, even though he was the number 4 receiver in the last place because he was a sophomore and he was behind all those guys. And then he gets to Alabama at the same time the most spectacular 17-year-old in the history of the league shows up, and he's got a sheriff spotlight with him. But when you watch each year has Germ, his role increases all 4 years of his college career, but as his role increases, his greatness increases along each and every way. It's been a great career arc where you're good, better, awesome.
Right.
And now he'll be a pro football player. But no doubt, Germie Bernard, a massive reason for Alabama's successes in 2025.
For sure. Yeah, we got to get to the defense. But we appreciate everybody who's been here for this. We're going to be releasing the other episode with the defense, talking about how they performed against South Carolina's offense. Feels like we were probably a little bit negative with the offense. There was a lot of problems. They still figured out a way to win, still figured out a way. Ty Simpson in those critical moments became a really good player. I think it was in some ways it was a Heisman-worthy performance because when it really mattered and they really needed him, I really thought that he stepped up. He was efficient. He was effective. And so while this offense had issues on Saturday, they also figured out a way to get it done when they really needed to. Get on over to roback.com. Use the promo code Crimson20 to get 20% off your orders, and we will talk to you guys soon.